fundamental deontological rule.
Oh no, what are we doing that? Violating consent isn't necessarily a bad thing, I don't think. We violate children's consent all the time when we tell them to like go to bed against their will. When you force your kid to take medicine or get a vaccination at the hospital. We even violate the consent, arguably, of adults sometimes.
Violating someone's consent is inherently morally wrong. The reason why goes back to the Kantian categorical imperative. If we were to do certain things in society...
Can Doe do it? Riley has described 2 different acts, and the second act is only wrong because it's inheriting the wrongness from the first act. When you say you're sorry, are you implying that you broke some deontological norm? Are you implying that you've decreased the amount of utility in the world? Are you coming at this from a virtue ethics position? Like, how can I even interpret your apology if we don't even have a meta-ethical conversation, right? Nobody in the real world functions this way. Okay, whoa! Honestly, once somebody has like triggered this level of like personal like kind of trauma dumping, I'd be like, okay, I don't think that it feels like we can't move much further in this conversation now, or I'm uncomfortable to do so. And then I think you just have to leave. Because now you're literally nothing that happens from this point. Even if Riley was making the most logical arguments in the world, which I don't think she has at this point, you're completely fucked. Buckle up, because I think this is a rough one. Whew.
Doe, you are live on the RGR.
No, why is it quiet? Edge plugin volume. Did I download a plugin for volume on Edge? Oh, Volume Boost Plus, I did. What does this look like? Oh, it's this thing. Okay, thank God.
I should turn you up just a little bit.
Okay, how goes it?
Did you say how goes it?
Yeah, I asked how goes it?
Yeah, it's going okay. Well, we've been streaming for a little bit. I waited here for a little bit. Your conversation, I was back in like 30 seconds.
Oh God, the volumes are unequal. Oh man. Good luck.
You started a brand new conversation. I was back so quickly.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The reason I brought on Malcolm was because Malcolm had actually been here waiting since like the beginning of the stream. Or,
yeah,
like, close to the
I saw that
beginning.
they were here before me. It's all right. I just, I was here so quick. I didn't think that you were gonna move on, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Did you have a good conversation? We didn't listen to it. I have no idea what you guys talked about. Your chat seems to say it's about Calvin Gara, but I don't know anything.
It was in part about that. It was interesting.
Okay.
So
off to a friendly start.
I'm assuming.
I think.
Do you mind if I read out the initial tweet that you sent at me to come onto here?
I mean, you want to read through the whole thing? I think that would be a little more enlightening than just the first tweet.
I'll read. I mean,
we can show it all together if you really want.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's just like the initial ones.
No, it's mega
like,
passive
hey,
aggressive.
Riley Grace Rochong, I'd love to debate. You blocked me and deleted all your videos, tweets after you called me a pedophile repeatedly. Zero evidence, aside from me saying not wearing shoes in public is not, quote, involving children in a sex act. First come, first serve, right? Yeah, so I apologize. Malcolm was here. Yeah, I just think the topic. Was Riley lying and trying to cover her tracks by repeatedly calling the CSA victim a pedophile for not thinking that not wearing shoes is actually okay to do in public is a really good topic. Feel free to let me know. So I did unblock
you added an extra not in there, but yeah.
Oh, sorry. Where did I add an extra not?
You said not thinking. It's all right. It's not a big deal.
Okay. Then I unblocked you. And yeah, so I guess I want to begin. Do you mind if I ask like a couple questions, just so I like set the?
Can we go a little bit further?
Oh wait, which one?
Oh, I just think that you're leaving off a lot of really important information. Is it okay if we read a little bit more?
Well, in this tweet it was just the 2 pictures.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that tweet is just those 2 pictures, but that wasn't the end of our interaction, right?
Yeah. There are a lot of other interactions. I asked you if you wanted to talk about gender. And you said that you didn't
did ask. You actually said, feel free to talk about gender here when I asked to come on and talk about this other topic.
Yeah, I was interested in talking about multiple topics. I thought that would have been cool because I know that you've talked about gender before. And I am also someone who talks about gender a lot. So I was super hecking interested in talking to you, but like, I know that you very strongly do not want to talk about gender with me. And I don't know why, but yeah, you don't have to. I'm not going to force you to. So do you mind if I ask you, like, just in here, you said that I repeatedly called you a pedophile. So first, can I get like just like all of the places? Like, can you just tell me? You can tell me if I've like deleted
how about
or
I
like
ask you a
uploaded
question?
videos.
Around the time this summer of the Kink at Pride conversation,
Oh man.
Did you private your Twitter and delete all of your tweets?
Yeah, I did. I was getting a lot of harassment at that point.
Oh, I'm sure you were, but privating your account, I delete my account every once in a while and reactivate it when I'm feeling a little, you know, I've got some other stuff to do and I don't want to focus on Twitter.
Yeah, the reason I deleted a lot of my content and I privated my account was because I was getting harassed a lot by people, mostly associated with you and your community. Yeah, I was just getting like constantly harassed, and I was just recovering from surgery around that time. So I just had to do that for my own mental health sake.
You had to delete your tweets for mental health?
Yeah, that's a place where people can be able to harass me.
Okay. I don't know how anal I'm going to be when I analyze this or when I think about this. That was a little bit passive aggressive from Doe. I don't know. They might have been more passive earlier. This is the first time I've clearly got like, you would delete your tweets for mental health. I think that's fair. I think Riley's fair to do that. If somebody wants to just wipe shit because they don't want people responding to it, I think that's probably fair.
It's me, yeah.
Well, I mean, you had your account privated. It's a little hard when you're privated.
Well, yeah, I wanted to make sure that when I reopened it, because I wanted to make sure that when I reopened it, that people could not like go through and harass me with the tweets that were still on there. That was around.
Can I ask what harassment means to you? I'm sorry for interrupting. If you want to finish what you were saying, I apologize.
Yeah, so around, I'm trying to remember, was that the Kink at Pride or the Eat the Rich?
Around July.
It was around, so that was, wait, hold on. So that would have been Eat the Rich, right? There were a lot of people who were sending.
I didn't do anything to you about Eat the Rich.
Okay, well, I know that like around that time, there were a lot of people who were sending me death threats.
Oh, yeah. We saw some of those. I think that that's pretty wrong to send you death threats. I think it's pretty inappropriate, pretty wrong. I'm sorry that you had to go through that. I've experienced similar things. I'm sorry about that. You have a few members of your community who like to say lots of things about me.
Wait, hold on. So do you have, wait, hold on. Who in my community has done anything like that?
Gammy.
Gammy? Hold on, wait. Gammy is not a part of my community.
She's in your chat right now.
Is anyone who's in my chat? Wait, hold on. You were in my chat.
Yeah, after I was blocked from here, because you, okay. Oh.
Hold on. No, yes. Hold on. Hold on. I'm talking to a lot of people who I disagree with. This is the first time that Gammy has been in my chat in months. All right?
Okay, that's fair. But do you remember when you posted a tweet a while back and you said, here's some really good accounts that I think are really important for you to follow for good trans voices. And one of them was Gammy?
Yeah. No, I remember that.
Okay, Doe should have never brought up that first example of she's in your chat when she had such a great second example. Like, anybody can be in anybody's chat, and it's going to be hard to prove, like, how much do you need to be in a person's chat to blah, blah, blah. Doe should have just said, didn't you recommend her on Twitter as a trans account that you should follow? That's like such a perfect first. I don't know why Doe would have opened with something so much weaker than that.
So
I wasn't aware of a lot of the things that
she was doing.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of a lot of the more problematic things that Gammy had done. It's actually why I ended up deleting that, or part of the reason why I ended up deleting that and disregarding that. But also, this isn't part of the comment that this isn't what we're talking about. You came here to talk about these allegations,
they're all
right?
kind of relevant. You were talking about harassment, and I was just curious what you.
Well, you're asking me why I privated my account and deleted it. So the reason why is because I was getting a lot of harassment.
Yeah, you were telling people that others were.
Hold on, wait. Are you saying?
Unquote, yeah.
All right. All right. So is the allegation? So I just want to be very clear. Do you have any tweets, or are there any tweets that you're alleging where I called you a pedophile?
Oh my God.
There were. I don't have any screenshots on me. You deleted them.
Oh wait. So hold on. So because I would dispute that is the case, but if I say that, then are you just going to accuse me of lying?
Accuse you of lying for I'm sorry, say that again.
So I would say that I do not remember, to the best of my ability, ever tweeting calling you a pedophile. Do you have any screenshots or evidence of that being the case?
I have a video of you saying that I intentionally or unintentionally was justifying pedophilia. And
okay, we're gonna go over that, but I want examples. Yeah, no, we'll go over that. But I just want to. You said multiple times You said here that I called you a pedophile multiple times. I want to know exactly when those
Jesus
multiple times
Christ.
were.
You deleted your Twitter or your tweets. I can't go find
Do you have
them, but I
any
can
evidence
find
that,
one.
wait, so I would dispute, I would say that I never tweeted.
Something that I would hit back here if I was really, and maybe I just get a special level of bullying or harassment when I'm on Twitter, but it sounds super sus to me when somebody's like, well, you deleted your tweets. And again, this might just be my perspective as skewed here, because people are screenshotting and everything all the fucking time. Like, you're telling me that you're mad enough to say somebody's making a major accusation against you, but nobody screenshotted or archived anything? That, like, I feel like that's like people run to do this before they do literally anything else. But maybe that's just because my account is bigger, or I've got more dedicated haters or whatever. Maybe that's not the case with everybody.
Calling you a pedophile.
Okay. You can hold that. I can't push you on that. I believe that you did. You believe that I didn't. I'm not gonna call you a liar. That's fine. But you.
I think a good faith, a bridge, extending a bridge here is. It sounds like Riley said something. Now I don't know, but based on how these two are talking about it, it sounds like Riley said something like, "Your arguments could be are the same arguments used to justify pedophilia," and Doe is taking this as, "You're calling me a pedophile." Now, I would argue that there is a difference between those two things, right? Like, you're making terrorist-adjacent arguments versus you are a terrorist, or you're a domestic abuser versus you're making the same types of excuses that domestic abusers make. I think there is a difference there. Now, maybe some people would argue that, well, in online communities, the nuance is lost. You're essentially making the same claim, which there might be some validity to that. But
I had a video in which you said it.
I had a video. All right, so let's talk about that video, because I think that's what you tweeted here, right?
Yeah, and then your girlfriend, I'm assuming, that's what I was
told. All right, hold
I
on. I'm not going to talk about the view. All right, hold on. I'm not here to defend what my girlfriend said. All right, we're here to talk about what I said. All right? So you're saying that this video is evidence of me calling you a pedophile. That's what you're saying.
I think that something that would have helped this conversation a great deal, because we're fighting over a lot of shit, and I don't actually... From a viewer perspective, I don't know what the fuck these two are talking about yet. I think it would have been nice for Riley to have Doe come on and be like, okay, just talk for like a minute or two. What exactly is it that we're here to argue about or discuss? I feel like that would have been like giving a broader opening would have been better to kind of like give some background to what the fuck this conversation is. I can kind of piece it together what's happening, but right now we're like getting into the weeds on shit, and I don't even know what forest we're in, you know?
I do think saying that someone is intentionally or unintentionally justifying pedophilia is calling them a pedophile, because what you're saying is that they think it's okay to do sexual acts to children.
No. Don't twist my words.
I don't think I twisted anything.
I don't think that you are being very honest when you say that. All right? So we can listen to the clip right now. I'll listen to it with my chat. All right.
Yeah, I guess I have to. Hold on, let me come pull it up really quick. I don't have mine open.
All right. Hold on.
Let me go to my media tab.
There's also, from like an attitude or maybe from an emotional perspective, both of these people sound like they absolutely fucking hate each other and are incredibly passive aggressive right out the gate. There's a lot of like tension here.
Tell me whenever you're ready.
Wait, are you done already? I think
no, I'm waiting for. I was sorry. I was waiting for you. I was waiting for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a second one that has a little bit more context. That's a little bit longer than the one that I quote tweeted with, but it's okay.
Okay. So
we can both play it at the same time now if you want.
All right. Wait. Which one are you playing? Is it the same clip?
Well, here. How about I do this? I've got this one that's got a little bit fuller context.
All right, when you say fuller context,
oh shit!
what are you meaning?
I tried to DM it to you so you could see it. It's just the previous part of the video. I clicked the one part.
So
because
I
it's the part where you have to say
have
pedophile, but the minute leading up to it, I also have a separate video of.
Wait,
but we can just watch the quick one if you really want.
Yeah.
The 20-second one.
Yeah, well, it's the one that you tweeted at me.
Yeah, the quote tweet. We can watch that one really quick. Ready?
Okay.
Right, 3, 2, 1.
Really weird. Now, a lot of people who come from really fringe parts of the internet are coming out with really weird takes that apparently kink is fine to do in front of children. We should be able to justify doing it in front of them, even if it's explicitly involving them in a sexual act. Like, what the fuck is going on? This is unironic. Oh my God. They're either negligently justifying pedophilia or intentionally justifying pedophilia. And I have no idea what the fuck it is. Okay. So did you finish it? Okay.
And
so I'm going to ask you, so where in that clip, did I call you a pedophile?
When you say that someone is intentionally or unintentionally, well, there's a couple places.
No, hold on.
Oh, this is actually so frustrating. I can see where a lot of this is going to go. So Riley is correct in her verbiage, but it's not going to feel that way. And I would even say Riley is doing a decent job to be careful in her verbiage, but it doesn't matter, I think, to this person. Saying that, because it is valid, to say that your arguments could be used to justify pedophilia, that is markedly different in syntax than calling you a pedophile. That is absolutely a different statement. But with the way the internet works and everything, some people might just take that as calling them a pedophile. Even though you are technically being careful with what you're saying, you're not saying they're a pedophile, you're saying your arguments can be used to justify pedophilia. Yeah.
That is not calling you a pedophile.
You asked me a really direct question and you won't let me finish my sentence.
All right, but that is not calling you a pedophile. That's saying that you advocated, that you made an argument that is typical to expect that pedophiles would make.
That's a bad way to phrase it, though. Riley's phrasing there is really bad.
That is my argument, and I stand by that argument.
But
we can go into the merits of it if you want to.
Let's go into the merits, because clearly just talking about this one sentence isn't going to go anywhere. So I think it's prudent of us to talk about your definition.
Wait. Yeah. So let's start with exactly what you said.
Okay. Riley is railroading the argument really hard. I think she needs to just slow down and let Doe at least get her line out, because I don't think. It feels like the impression that I get, and it might not be true, but the impression that I get is it feels like Riley is too scared to let her talk. Like she's going to say something that's going to blow apart Riley's argument. Now, I don't know if that's the case, and that's just a baseless accusation. It might be true, but that's what it feels like when Riley keeps cutting her off over and over and over and over and over again.
So you said, and I quote, "Some people like feet. If you go shoeless to a public event because your partner likes feet, you're not, quote, involving children in a sexual act." That's what you said, right?
That is what I said.
You're talking about a foot fetish.
I am talking about a foot fetish. I'm proud of you.
Okay.
This is so passive-aggressive.
I want you to answer me this question. If you are getting off your partner's foot fetish around children, do you think it's not a little reasonable for someone to say, okay, this seems like something that a pedophile may argue, and this person either knows what they're doing or they are negligent and they're saying it even though they don't understand its implications?
So, nowhere in this tweet has anyone talked about getting off.
Wait, hold on. What do you think happens when you appeal to someone's sexual kink?
Doe is correct here. The next step is okay, well, what do we mean when we say getting off, right? Because somebody could wear a type of outfit that helps to quote unquote get their partner off versus somebody could be actively getting their partner off, right? We need to distinguish what these two things mean.
We're talking about a fetish. We're talking about foot fetish.
About sexual desires. We're talking about.
We're talking about getting off someone else's fetish.
You keep saying getting off. Why do you keep saying that?
Because that's the only implication. All right, so I guess then let's back up.
Can I give you an implication? You're allowed to ask questions if you're confused.
I mean, I'm very much not confused. I can guarantee you that. But let me ask you a question.
Neither side really wants to have a discussion. Because Doe could have phrased that in a much less passive aggressive way. They could have just said, I can explain, rather than being you can ask a question if you want. Doe could have just said, I can just explain this, rather than being they're both just insanely triggered as fuck coming out the gate on this. So it's going to be really hard for any good actual conversation to take place, which based on all the Twitter response and everything, there was no good conversation about Jesus.
So
you haven't represented me correctly yet, so I think you might be just a little bit confused.
I'm going to doubt that, but let me ask you a question. So what is your definition of a sexual act?
So sex acts is super complex. I think the biggest issue that I actually have, and I mean not biggest, but the first issue I have is probably your definition of sex act. If I remember correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'll give you a chance to in just a second.
Okay.
that a sex act is any action that occurs with sexual intent, sexual desire, right? Is that about right?
Roughly. It's when you do something intentionally and primarily
What was that?
appealing to yours or someone else's sexual desires.
Yeah, okay. So I think I got it about right. So I think that this is so broad as to be useless, and I don't think that any legal system defines it this way. For example,
I would disagree. I would absolutely disagree.
Let her finish. Let her finish.
Yeah, go ahead, but I'm just saying, like, I disagree with that.
I just don't know why you have to interrupt me when I'm in the middle of talking.
Well, I'm just saying that I disagree with that. You can.
Well, in my state, I looked up the sex acts law, and they actually, so I live in North Carolina, and criminal law designates differences between sex acts, sexual contact, sexual activity, and sexual penetration. They define sex acts as the sexual contact of one or more sex organs, including but not limited to cunnilingus, fellatio, analingus, or anal intercourse, or the penetration of any object into the genital or anal opening of another person's body. Sexual contact is a focus on touching a person's quote, intimate parts. Sexual penetration is, we can understand that. And sexual activity, the main thing that they listed there was masturbation.
Okay, so let me.
So we have a lot of different, it's a very varied, the legal system is a very varied way of approaching these kinds of discussions.
And so I actually, there's some interesting context because I've actually taken, so as you know, I'm a law student. I've actually taken criminal law. Are you familiar with the history of how we've gotten to like our modern?
I would never, ever, ever bring up something like that in a debate. It makes you sound super like, I'm a philosophy student, I'm a law student. I would never bring that up from just an optics and from a conversation or whatever, unless you're just trying to trigger the fuck out of the other person, but.
Common law rape standard.
I probably don't know the history as well as you do, being a law student, but I was actually in the middle of talking.
Well, I mean, you're going on, right.
Me. I was actually asking a really direct question, and I was actually talking my way through it. I don't know why you keep doing this.
I mean, like, if you keep talking and you just keep going on and you have a really
I just
long-winded...
listed the legal system sex acts and the way that it differentiates between it, because one of my points here is that this is a very nuanced conversation, and I think you lose some of the nuance that I think is really important to this conversation.
You're right. So we can go through that. We can talk about why those definitions are in fact problematic, because the history of the evolution of the legal standard for what constitutes a sex act has actually been to broaden it more over time. Historically, rape was only the penetration of a vagina by a penis by a man of a woman, and using excessive force. But the reason why that's not the standard anymore, is because we realize that actually sex acts are a lot more than just physical penetration.
That's true.
Yeah, that is true. So I would not say that the law is a good heuristic to be able to rely on in this conversation, since we are able to recognize that sex and sex acts are a lot more than just basic forms of penetration.
I agree. I actually listed things that weren't penetration.
Yeah, and I would say that we still need a broader, understanding of sex acts, because you end up excluding a lot of very harmful situations that run into the problem of violating one's consent.
That is where I was going to move the conversation, as a question of consent. And because you seem to, again, correct me if I'm wrong, have a view that we consent to seeing things in public, that's like a thing that happens.
No, wait, hold on. My exact view in respect to consent, especially as it concerns sex, is that if someone is going to involve you in a sex act or do something around you as a sex act, then you need to acquire their consent to do that. If you do not, then you violate their consent, you categorically cause them harm. Children cannot consent.
Wait, how do you cause them harm?
Because you're violating a fundamental deontological rule.
Oh no, what are we doing that? I think you have to, this is so problematic, oh man, hold on, I'm sorry, my brain is just like, there's like 50 million things that are wrong with this. I don't know of, first of all, even deontologically, let me say by principle, violating consent isn't necessarily a bad thing, I don't think. We violate children's consent all the time when we tell them to like go to bed against their will, when we force them to go to school, when we force them to finish their vegetables, when we there's all sorts of quote unquote consent violations that happen there. That like, yeah, obviously we do this. When you force your kid to take medicine or get a vaccination at the hospital. Yeah, there's a trillion examples. Number one, we even violate the consent, arguably, of adults sometimes, maybe. If I'm walking down the street and somebody like passes out or something, I might roll that person over. I might give that person CPR. You might try a Heimlich maneuver. You call 911. Like, you don't have consent for them to do any of this stuff. It's also problematic to say that anything that happens in the public sphere, like every other person necessarily needs to consent to. For instance, I don't necessarily like want to watch people make out in public. But like if somebody else is making out in public in a place where I can see it, is my consent being violated there in an immoral way? I don't want to listen to people's music. I don't know why people walk around with their fucking, with their Bluetooth speakers blasting. That's annoying. Is that like violating my consent like in an immoral or unethical way? Like, can't you argue? I'm guessing Doe is going to move forward to argue with this, that when you step into a public sphere, to some extent, you are consenting to things that you don't necessarily like. I might see ugly cars. I might see ugly faces. I might see people doing things that I don't like or approve of. I might see political slogans that I disagree with. There might be offensive imagery. Like, there's a ton of stuff that, yeah, this is, I don't know which direction this conversation is going to go in, but I don't know how Riley would defend. It seems like there's a lot there to... There's a lot there to go off of, but Jesus. All right, let's see.
Anything? Can you explain that?
Yeah, there are certain things which if you do, they are inherently morally wrong. Murder is an example. If you do it, is inherently morally wrong. Violating someone's consent is inherently morally wrong. The reason why goes back to the Kantian categorical imperative.
Oh, no.
If we were to do certain things in society,
then
that would mean that we end up leading to a contradiction, whereas we end up not being able to have the thing that we wanted to begin with.
I don't think the categorical, like, we can talk about like universalization of different moral acts, and there's going to be times when violating consent is a moral act. I don't think invoking the categorical imperative here gets us to all forms of violation of consent are necessarily immoral. Like consent in and of itself, I think that's just like, that's a shortcut to other things. We have to take it like a step further. Like, yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
If you go around violating other people's consent, then we end up justifying a world where anyone can violate anyone's consent. We no longer have consent. And I really care about consent. So I say we do everything we can to respect consent.
Altså, vi snakker om, vi gerne vil se det, men havde vi...
So this statement, the way to tear into this statement, we'll see which direction Doe goes, is there are many different kinds of consents. And we need to figure out
like... der expands...
Like there's a lot of different types of consent. Like, I don't think you could ever say like here's a blanket. Like this is let's see.
I think we should absolutely respect consent too. I think it's really important. I just don't think that when it comes to the public, that there is a very good argument for seeing something being involved.
Jeg frisk på at køre til
I would disagree. No, hold on. No, it's not the seeing the thing.
Let her finish. Let them finish. Okay.
Not the issue. The issue is not seeing the. Well, I mean,
Doe needs to be way more aggressive in terms of getting all their points out. They can't get cut off and then immediately stop talking, in my opinion. But
it's sort of seeing the thing. It depends on exactly what the sex act is.
You say that it's about seeing, that they don't have, you haven't gotten the consent of others to see it, to be around you while you do it.
Wait, hold on. No, I want to make sure.
I thought that's what you just said. I'm sorry if it's not.
No, we're focusing on consent, and the consent is either about the risk. It's either about being involved in sex act or the risk of being involved.
Om det bare skal være alkemi og høre på det som igen.
So, what does being involved mean?
It depends on the sexual act. There's a lot of different sex acts, I would say. For example, we can imagine situations where people, like in the BDSM community, are engaging in a sexual act where both are getting off despite the fact that they may not be touching each other at all. Like, we can easily imagine this kind of a conversation. Or we can imagine...
I think in this case, this is where, let's bring out some hypotheticals and then explore that. We really need to get an example on the ground here so that we can both like talk about it. I think it's important.
Imagine like if someone is watching porn, we can imagine that like, oh, well, in that case, they're not touching another person. They're probably engaging in some kind of sex act.
See you around.
Or like phone sex, which has sex in the name. You're not talking to another person. We would call that a sex act. Or you are talking.
Okay. Fuck. This sounds selfish. I wish Riley would have had this conversation with me first before testing this out as like a public debate. If I'm sexting with somebody and I'm like and there are like kids in the area, am I violating their consent? Is that true? If I pull out my phone and I'm like sending news to some girl and there's like a kid in the restaurant with me, am I like involving that kid? Like, this is a super bizarre argument. I don't think you ever, they talk about that? Okay.
To another person, but it's digital, right? Like the whole point is that I want to make sure that we have a comprehensive definition of sex, because I think that any of these instances you would agree with me constitute sex, and if not, we end up getting into incredibly dangerous situations.
Any of the things that you just listed constitute sex?
I would say that they are sex acts specifically. Like for example, let's say, here we'll go through some hypotheticals. Let's say that you are interacting. Let's say that you have like a crush on or you know someone else who has like a crush on a coworker wherever it is that you work. All right.
Hypothetical got out really quick. So I know somebody who has a crush on a coworker.
Okay. And let's say that in that instance, the person who has the crush takes a picture.
Wait, hold on. Why do I see people in Twitch chat and DGG bringing up Anthony Weiner? The problem with Anthony Weiner wasn't whether there was a pic with a child. First of all, when you say with a child, he wasn't like fucking his child or something crazy, right? The problem is that he was sexting an underage girl. I thought it was because the girl he was talking to was like 14 or 15. Wasn't that the problem?
What's your problem? Pull up alle sammen gange.
Like, I don't know if you, at the risk of being weird or talking to a bunch of children, I don't know if you guys know this, but a lot of parents will fuck with like their fucking, what's before toddler? When their kid is like 6 months old in a bassinet or whatever, or in like like parents will fuck around their quote unquote like pre-whatever kids, infants. Yeah. It's not like, are they pedophiles or like because the kid can hear them or like, it's just like that's so weird. I don't know. Okay, sorry.
Coworker without their knowledge and ends up masturbating to it without their consent. Would you agree with me that this is something which is gonna be close?
Hold on, what was the question here?
And coworker masturbating to it without their consent. In that instance, the person who has the crush takes a picture of the coworker without their knowledge and ends up masturbating to it without their consent. Would you agree with me that this is something which is morally wrong?
Oh, shit. All right. Can Doe do it? Riley has described 2 different acts, and the second act is only wrong because it's inheriting the wrongness from the first act. Sorry, it might sound weird. There's nothing wrong with masturbating to publicly available pictures of people, okay? If people are gonna do it, if people want to do that, that's on them, okay? But if you are taking pictures of somebody else without consent, that act in and of itself is wrong. And we can argue that things that flow from that are wrong as well. So if I'm masturbating to a picture of somebody that I took candidly, that is probably wrong, right? But not because you're masturbating to a picture of somebody, but because you got that picture in a candid manner without their consent. That's the wrong part about it.
I think that the taking depends on the kind of picture.
Let's just say it's just
expectation of what?
Let's just say that it's just them and their work.
That was close. Let's see if they get there.
Oh my god.
I don't know if I can morally condemn
men
someone for masturbating and thinking about somebody. Taking a picture without somebody's consent is like the strange part.
Okay,
yeah, she's almost got it. She needs to break that apart better into 2 different acts. They have the idea.
Now, all right, what? All right, let's elaborate on that then. All right, then let's say that after that coworker masturbates to the person who they did not acquire the consent, be able to masturbate to that person, that they go and they tell that person that they masturbated to them. Would you reasonably expect that the person who was masturbated to without their knowledge probably feel violated to some degree.
Dårlig idé.
I don't have to consider it. It's happened to me. Yeah, it's a little weird.
Dårlig idé,
Okay,
dårlig
cool.
idé, dårlig
So
idé.
why is no? It's not just weird. You would say that that's morally wrong.
Big crit. Dårlig idé, dårlig
We're
idé,
gonna
dårlig
have
idé.
a moral problem in this debate. I'm trying not to like make it the point because it doesn't matter. But
No, wait, hold on. It absolutely does. Violating someone's consent is
I'm sorry.
paramount. I want to make sure that we are protecting people.
Okay.
I don't believe in morals the way that you do. So I'm trying to avoid that kind of conversation because we don't need to have a meta ethical conversation in this.
Fuck. Is this a Destiny? Why do people? I feel like people bite my shit so
Hvorfor er der
much.
så mange mobs lige her?
Okay. We don't have to get into a discussion about meta ethics, sure, but if we're having a conversation about sexual consent, by definition, it's going to be a moral argument, of course. Now, this is some weird thing that some people believe. I don't think Doe or RGR believes this, or maybe Doe might believe this. You don't have to come from the same ethical place that another person does to have an ethical conversation. Here's the... Get mad, philosophy students, okay? If you study ethics, I hope you get real mad. Here's the reality, okay? 99% of humanity agrees on like 90 to 95% of like ethical propositions, okay? There's a few shit in the edges around like maybe like LGBT issues or fucking weird religiosity shit maybe. But like for the most part, most people agree on like most moral shit, okay? Now you can spend all day arguing about meta ethics or normative ethics or whatever. Do that shit if you want. But the reality is most of us agree on most shit, okay? If I run into somebody on the street and I'm like, oh my God, yo, I'm sorry. Nobody's gonna look at me and be like, you're sorry? I don't even know your meta-ethical framework. I don't even know how to interpret. How do I even parse that language? When you say you're sorry, are you implying that you broke some deontological norm? Are you implying that you've decreased the amount of utility in the world? Are you coming at this from a virtue ethics position? Like, how can I even interpret your fucking apology if we don't even have a meta-ethical conversation, right? Nobody in the real world functions this way. We can absolutely, like, say that, like, hey, that was wrong. Don't murder people. Don't rape people, right? Don't steal from people. Like, there's a reason why, like, the 10 commandments are, like, not all 10 of them, but, like, fucking 7 or 8 of them, I think, right? Are universalized throughout, like, almost every single fucking society, okay? Yeah, sorry. But, okay.
Discussion. I don't think that I could say that it's morally
Hold on.
wrong.
Why do countries so defer in their laws then? I don't think they do. I think the vast majority of countries like have murder as illegal, have like rape or stealing is illegal. Like, yeah, if you're gonna say like, okay, well, Destiny, what about the fact that the tax treatment to corporations that engage in reinvestment is actually, yeah, maybe when you get into the weeds on like some complicated, but for the most part, okay, you're not allowed to fuck kids. You're not allowed to steal people's shit. You're not allowed to set buildings on fire, okay? For the most part, we all kind of agree around the world on some shit. Now, are some places a little bit crazy? Yeah, absolutely, okay? Is there a little bit more, you know, spousal rape happening in some places? Is there a little bit more, arguably, I don't want to say pedophilia because it's a loaded word, like child bride shit that happens? Yeah, sure, not everybody. But for the most part, we all kind of agree on most things, okay?
Wrong to masturbate to somebody, but I think telling them is strange. I don't know if I would say it's morally wrong.
Okay. Fuck. Now I wish I argued with Doe about this. Doe is I think Doe is really close to being correct. I don't know if she hasn't like formalized these arguments before or whatever, or like really like had to like test them out, but they're pretty much correct, right? Well, there's two different acts here. Masturbating to somebody isn't, fuck it, anybody can do it. It's not a wrong thing to do that, but telling them you do that, well now that's a separate act. We need to break apart these acts as different things so we can view these different acts as being good or bad. You can masturbate to anybody you fucking want to. That's shit you do in your home on your own time, okay? But when you bring it up to another person, hey, I masturbate to you, right? Now you're committing a different act. Now it's a little bit weird.
That's still recharging.
Is going to make them uncomfortable.
Now this is, wait, so hold on. So if you masturbate to someone else and you don't get their consent, then it's fine as long as they don't find out?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I don't, I would say that there are ways that it
Doe should just own that and say, yeah, of course, yeah, yes.
Wrong.
What are the ways?
I think that sexual desire towards children.
It's so weird.
No, hold on.
be-
Wait,
But you come out
pause.
in for
No,
the-
we're
yeah, I
talking
don't
about
know.
the nature of what is a sex act. Do not pivot away from this. Why would it be
I wasn't
wrong?
trying to pivot away. I was trying to tell you an example of where I thought it would be wrong.
Okay, so the example would be wrong if it would be children?
Yeah, I think that there's something inherently predatory about.
Oh man, I don't think that this just might have to be an uncomfortable bullet that Doe bites, because now we're getting into really weird territory. Oh shit, I was gonna hammer them on this one.
What if we're talking about an adult?
Okay, let's just stick with adults. That's good.
Yeah, that's what I was working to. I don't think that I can say that it's wrong to think about somebody and masturbate to them.
Even if you don't. All right. So why do you think that if they ended up going to tell, if you masturbate to someone, that if you go and you tell that person that you masturbated to them, why do you think that they might be a little put off?
Because you've made them into an object a little bit in your mind. Even if you consider them as a full subject, it's objectification.
Hold on, no, the average person. No, the average per. Oh, hold on, and it's not. That's not necessarily the case. All right,
Sure.
that's not necessarily the case. It could be the case where no, you actually like totally no. You just like you're really infatuated with them. You see them totally as a person, but you masturbate to them without their consent.
Sure, I think that there's still a level of.
Okay, I'm trying to be really careful because I don't want to assume. I'm trying not to like be like, oh, everybody on the internet copies all of my arguments. Something that Doe is hitting on though sounds like something I've said in the past, which is in my mind, I don't know if there's like an academic or formalized definition of this, but in my mind, there's two different things that I view, okay? And Doe is getting towards this, or almost said it. You've got like sexualization, and then you've got like objectification, okay? If I want to walk around and sexualize the fucking world, fucking do it. Go for it. If you want to go masturbate to all the fucking things in the world you want, go out there, coom all you want. Not go out there, stay in there, okay? Stay in your house, right? Sexualization, in my opinion, sexualization happens in the mind. When you start to objectify somebody, you're basically taking your sexualization and you're projecting it onto them, and then you are turning them into some form of like sexual object that involves them in your sexualization. So if you take your sexualizing of somebody and then you make it somebody else's problem, now you're kind of treating that person in an objectifying manner. So if I'm gonna masturbate to somebody, okay, fine. But now if I start telling them about it, if I start DMing them, if I start touching them, if I start harassing them, well, now I've turned it into like an objectification kind of thing. That's the distinction that I draw in my mind between sexualization versus objectification. Sexualization is fine, knock yourself out, who the fuck cares? Objectification, when you start treating people in a sexualized manner, now we have a problem. That's, this is how I understand these things in my mind.
Objectification that can occur there. It doesn't have to, but yeah.
So wait, do you think that that's
wait? Let me. I don't have my lights on. I don't know why. 1 second. Okay.
The only reason? Do you think that's the only reason why someone might be off-put if they're told that they were masturbated to without acquiring their consent?
Can you ask that question again? I was trying to talk. I didn't know that you were talking. What'd you say?
Do you think that is the only reason why someone who learns that they were masturbated to without their consent would be off-put at learning that new knowledge?
Do I think that they would be off-put? Is that what you just asked?
I'm asking you, do you think that the reason that you gave is the only reason why?
No, I've already said that. I think that the reasons can be multitudinous.
Like what?
Like who fucking cares?
Becoming a sexualized object in the mind of somebody else is itself. I know I did.
So say something else.
Oh my god.
Oh man.
I don't know the reasons that everyone might come away with feeling a negative feeling from a particular event.
Okay, I'm going to give you the answer. Now, the answer is violating their consent. That is the reason why. You didn't violate their consent. You did violate their consent. Yes, you did. If this person is hypothetical,
I wonder if oh god, there's so many problems with this. If Doe would have just been calmer in this conversation, to be clear, I like Riley more, obviously. But if Doe would have been a little bit calmer in this conversation, I think Doe could have dismantled all of these arguments with alacrity. Is consent around sexual things special? Or is it consent for all thoughts? Like, if I think of somebody, let's say that I'm like, let's say that I'm playing with Legos and I'm a kid, or let's say I'm an adult and I play with Legos and I'm gonna pretend that like, oh, this guy's Mr. Mooten, and I'm running around and I'm like playing with my guys. Like, am I violating Lucas's consent because I didn't tell him or ask permission to think of him in this scenario? Can you like, this is just so weird that to invoke a thought of somebody in my mind violates their consent. I don't need that person at all. I could never see that person again in the world. Is this actually a violation of their consent? If I'm not doing anything to them, I'm not involving them in anything. It's just a thought that I have of the person.
How are you? Good day to you.
Masturbated someone else and did not acquire their consent to do so, you violated their consent.
How did you violate their consent?
Because you were able to use an aspect of them to get yourself off sexually without their permission.
You used your mind to get yourself off.
You used that person, the image of that person.
Yeah.
Hold on, wait, all right. I need to ask you another question. No, hold on. So is the problem...
I think so. Fuck. I'm trying not to be mean to Riley because I love Riley, okay? But this sounds like an example of where Riley has thought about these arguments a lot more, but I would say that she's incorrect. And I don't know if Doe has spent a lot of time like formally hashing out their arguments, but I would say that Doe is correct. So it feels like Riley spent a lot of time formalizing these thoughts, but I disagree with them. Doe hasn't spent enough time, but I think that they're more on track to be yeah.
Unlucky.
Like, if someone does not know that you use them to get off sexually, then it's fine.
It depends on how you use them.
Why does it depend?
Well, because there are some ways where you can physically use somebody.
Oh, yeah. Fuck, I feel like I'm gonna be saying, I'm probably not gonna stop to say this again. Like, when you say use somebody, that word is doing a lot of lifting there in a lot of different ways. What does it mean to use somebody, right? If I were to tell Lucas, hey, entertain my stream for 6 hours, I'm going to the beach today, and I'm not gonna pay you shit, motherfucker. That's not the same usage as me, like, using him as an inspiration for an idea, or using him in a masturbation fantasy, or using him as a name for a character in a game. Like, using somebody, that word in and of itself is almost a worthless word. It almost doesn't mean anything. What does it mean to use something, right? Like, do I use protein powder in my shakes the same way that somebody might use a mental health animal to feel better, which is the same as how you might use, you know, like a piece of plywood to build, like, use is like a worthless word there. I think that needs to be expanded on way more. What does it mean to use something? Because I can, like, if I were to ask you, for instance, is it ethical to use people? Well, what do you mean? Like, I use my dad to get a ride to school. Is that ethical? Versus I use somebody for, like, it's that word in and of itself is just so worthless. It needs to be expanded upon.
And there are some ways in which it remains entirely in your mind. I don't think desire itself requires somebody else's consent.
Why does the physicality matter? There are easily sex acts that we can imagine, which are not strictly physical.
Can you name one for me?
Like masturbating to someone.
But you didn't do an action to them.
Yeah, but you're using them. You are using
your mind.
Ah, fuck. So Donnie's asking, why is that wrong?
In your mind, you're imagining them. If you have the picture, like I said, the picture seems to be like the weird part of that, but like...
All right, hold on. I'm going to give you another example, and I'm going to ask you to distinguish it. All right? Because I want to. I'm trying to get exactly like what your morals are here.
Oh man.
If you have someone.
Det är det der sker når man bliver for woke.
Let's say that you have a person who goes out into public, all right, and they have a humiliation fetish, okay, and they go out in front of anyone. It could be children, but just anyone who has not provided consent, and they, I don't know. Let's say that they like defecate themselves, all right. And they end up... I
didn't know they had a scat fetish too, Jesus.
I don't know why you're trying to get like ad homs or whatever in. Wait. Anyway.
Riley just didn't understand. Scat refers to poop stuff, but okay.
Wait, no, that wasn't it. That wasn't. I said I don't know why they have a scat fetish. That wasn't. I was joking. You gave them one fetish and then you added another. I just was being silly. I'm sorry.
Well, it's a.
Okay,
we're talking about someone with a humiliation fetish, all right? The point is that they go out into public, all right? And then around other people, they defecate themselves, other people see them, and as a consequence of other people seeing them, they orgasm. Specifically because other people watch them. Would you say that this violates the consent of the other people watching them?
Jeg følger ikke rigtig med. Det er virkelig kedeligt samtale.
So this is a hard one if you've never thought about this before.
Faktisk super fucking kedeligt samtale. Jeg havde set memesene med den. Og der tænkte jeg nok, at det var en kedelig samtale. Jeg slår en tid til.
CEO of the brain.
Meget federe.
I remember reading somewhere too that isn't the like amygdala like hyperactive or something happens. There's
yeah.
And it's difficult, you know, I think, well, sleep in general is difficult for so many people, and we can speak why, but so this starts to come back to your original question about REM sleep, though. So we get this memory replay, absolutely fascinating. We can now see it in humans. We can even manipulate it, which is amazing. So if I teach you some information on a screen, let's say it's about a particular object, like a fire engine, and you have to try and learn both the object and the spatial location of that on a screen. And then tomorrow, we're going to sort of come back, and I'm just going to show you the image and say, do you remember seeing it or not? Yes or no? And if you do remember seeing it, you've got to place where you thought it was on the screen. So you have to learn the item and you have to learn the associated location. Here's the great part. During the initial learning session before you slept, not only do you see the fire engine, but we play the sound of the fire engine, like a fire engine ring. And then we show you a kettle and it's whistling. We show you a cat and it's meowing. So each of these items that you're making has a contextual cue associated with it, a sound. And it's a congruent sound. Fire engine sound, fire engine, kettle sound. And here's the fun part. I can teach you 100 of these items. And then during sleep, I'm going to replay those sounds that you heard as if I'm trying to get into your brain and I'm selectively reactivating each one of those individual memories. But I'm only going to reactivate and replay half of those memories. I'm only going to replay 50 of the 100 things that you've learned. And then the next day, we wake you up and we test you. And firstly, your memory is better after sleep, and that's what we found. What's interesting is that for those items that I replayed during sleep, they are almost twice as superior in terms of your memory retention.
So the playing of them doesn't disrupt the sleep at all? Or?
Well, that's the key. You have to play at a sub-threshold awakening sound. So we will test your auditory threshold, and we will then play the sound at a level that we know is below your awakening threshold. So it's still just enough to get in, to penetrate into the brain and tickle the memory and reactivate it.
That's fascinating.
But it's not enough to wake you up. So now, you know, you could imagine, you know, I've got these science fiction ideas of thinking, well, I learn all of this information and maybe I can just put my favorite playlist on, you know, at night at low sound and, you know, stimulate these memories. Or could it be a study aid where you know, help students learn sci-fi stuff?
So you think coupling different sounds maybe with, you know, learning facts that may actually help?
Yeah.
Like, irrespective of replaying them like during sleep, do you think just even the coupling of the sounds somehow can help?
As long as those sounds have been coupled and bound to specific information, and this is what we call context-dependent or cue-dependent memory. This is well known in psychology over about 100 years. If you study in the room that you're going to take the exam, you do better because you actually use cues, contextual cues from around the room that are triggers to help you better remember.
Wow. So
we're just doing that with sleep.
What about caffeine? So if you study caffeinated and you don't take your exam caffeinated, is this kind of the same concept?
We don't know about caffeine. It's an interesting thing. Caffeine may be it's a non-specific stimulant. Whether it works with ingested substances, we know, however, this works also with odors. So have you ever had that experience where you're sort of in an airport and you're sort of tying your shoelaces after security, someone walks past with that cologne or a perfume of a person you knew, and it instantly unlocks that memory, as if the sound has triggered the reactivation of the memory and it comes flooding back. Well, you can do the same thing with this memory and sleep trick, where I teach you stuff during the day and we can puff certain odors up your nose and associate the smell with the learning material, and then during sleep, you reperfuse the odor up the nose.
Oh, really?
And you can get the same benefit as well, the same doubling of memory benefit.
That's fascinating. I remember the study that was done coupling an odor. It was like a cherry blossom odor with electrical shocks. So those, you know, classical fear, you know, studies that they do in mice, in rodents, and there was some sort of epigenetic change that the breathing of the odor or the cherry blossom was inducing, that was like changing some receptor on the glucocorticoid receptor. So it was getting passed on to like the next generation. And so even though the next generation didn't have the shock and the coupling of the smell, if they were exposed to the smell, they had a fear.
The memory was translated from one generation to the next.
Anyways, it'd be fascinating to know what role sleep plays in the epigenetic transfer.
Right. So if we all start doing this, are our children going to be incredible memory replayers? By the way, but to come back to you, I'm sorry I've taken a desperately long time to answer your original question, which was, what about REM sleep? So what we've spoken about is the first 2 of the 3 stages of memory processing with sleep. Sleep before to get the brain ready to lay down memories, sleep after to grab a hold of those individual memories and cement them into the neural architecture of the brain. Once you've done that, though, there's a final step, and that seems to not depend on deep non-REM sleep, but instead depend on rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep, which is what most of us know as dream sleep. And it's during dream sleep that your brain essentially performs informational alchemy, is what I would describe it as. It's a little bit like group therapy for memories, that sleep has gathered in all of the information during the day, and during non-REM sleep, which always comes first, by the way. In our sleep cycle, we always have non-REM sleep first, then REM sleep second, then non-REM sleep again, then REM sleep second. And we don't know why. There is no good explanatory data suggesting why non-REM sleep always comes first and REM sleep comes second. But I've put forward the theory that for information processing, it makes sense, which is that non-REM sleep first to just get what you've learned and lock it into the brain. REM sleep then comes along, and REM sleep starts to fuse all of the information that you've recently learned with the entire back catalog of information that you've got stored up across a lifetime of experience. And it's this sort of, essentially REM sleep is creating a revised mind-wide web of associations. And I'd like to sort of think of what's going on with REM sleep, and we've done lots of these studies to look at this, and there's clever ways that you can look at sleep and associative memory processing and building new novel connections. And it's almost like memory pinball, where you take these new memories and you sort of launch them up and you start bouncing them around into the architecture of information within the brain. And you're starting to test associations. You're starting to say, should this new information be connected to this? Maybe not. Should it be connected to this? Maybe not.
Hello.
Now, some of that happens whilst we're awake during the day. We make obvious connections. But what's strange is that we make connections during REM sleep, but they're not of the same kind. The connections that we're making during REM sleep are the long shot. This is the bizarre,
right.
strange, it would be the equivalent of saying during the day, we take this information and the connections we make are like a Google search gone right, which is the first page is all of the things that are most related.
Hello.
And it's very obvious. Page 1, that's directly related to what I inputted. During REM sleep, it's almost as though you input the search term and you're immediately taken to page 20 of the Google search, which is about some field hockey game in Utah. Yeah. And you think, hang on, I don't understand. Oh, that's interesting. I see what you're talking about. So we make these bizarre leaps of associative memory processing faith during REM sleep. And that's why we now understand that it's REM sleep that helps us divine remarkable creative insights into previously impenetrable problems. And you can see this throughout the history of human beings, this dream-inspired insight. Scientific demonstrations, August Kekulé divined the idea of a benzene ring, these double carbon rings, by dreaming of a serpent that swallowed its tail. Dmitri Mendeleev, came up with the periodic table of elements by way of dream inspiration. People have won Nobel Prizes. Otto Lowy won the Nobel Prize for the demonstration of chemical transmission across nerve cells. And he dreamt of the experiment that helped improve that. He didn't dream of the concept itself, but he dreamt of the experiment to prove it. Wonderful artistic demonstrations of this too. Paul McCartney has written innumerable songs, it turns out, by way of his dreams. Keith Richards came up with the opening chords of Satisfaction by way of dream-inspired insight. So REM sleep takes that third component of information processing, and I think it's what defines us differentially from computers in part, which is that deep sleep is about knowledge, which is gathering all of the information and holding on to it. REM sleep, I would argue, is about wisdom, which is knowing what it all means when you fit it together. You know, that's what I want from a good student. Don't just give me dry book learning. Do you really understand it? Can you apply it? Are you creative? That's dream sleep.
Right, a deep thinker. Why do you sometimes not remember your dreams and sometimes you do remember your dreams? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, so some of it seems to be about if you wake up out of that dream sleep period and then you go back into sleep, the awakening can sometimes help you commit that experience to memory.
Oh, okay.
But there are people who say that I never remember my dreams. You know, we can bring those people into my sleep center and we can, you know, wake them up in the middle of dream sleep and they'll say it's remarkable for the first time I was dreaming. And the answer is no, it's not the first time that you were dreaming. It's just the first time that you've actually remembered a dream because it's the first time you've typically woken up.
Okay. My mother-in-law, you know, claims that she doesn't dream, and of course I'm like, no, you have to dream.
Yeah,
that must
there
be
are a selection of patients that have a lesion in a part of the prefrontal cortex in their white matter, which are these big sort of informational fiber tracts that communicate impulses. If you get a lesion deep down there, we do seem to genuinely see a cessation of dreaming in those patients. By the way, I didn't even feel confident to write this in the book, and it's still a theory that I've never really aired in public, but go with me on this, which is I think that we may actually remember all of our dreams, or it's possible that there's a tenable theory. The problem is we don't have access to those dreams. Those dreams are memorized and they are available, they're just not accessible. I think what happens as we wake up is that we lose the IP address to those memories. And the reason I believe this to be potentially true is, have you ever had the experience where you wake up and you think, I was dreaming, and I know I was dreaming, and you try as hard as you can, the harder you try, the worse the memory recall goes, and then you think, oh, forget it. 2 days later, you're walking along and you see a street sign, and all of a sudden it triggers the unlocking of that dream memory. You think, oh, that's what the dream was about. As a neuroscientist, that tells me that the memory was present, the memory was available. The problem was accessibility. You couldn't gain recall access. So the information is there, it's just not accessible.
Yeah. It's happened to me just even after I've, you know, when I go to bed, then, you know, later that night, I hit the pillow and all of a sudden I remember the dream right as I'm hitting the pillow.
Right.
That's happened to me more than once.
Which sort of tells you that there is, it's almost a scary prospect, which is that maybe every single one of our dreams throughout life are stored and are present and determine our behavior to some degree. Because we know that there is an enormous amount of information that changes our behavior and our decisions, that goes on below the radar of consciousness, implicit memory. That could be true for dreaming too. And I think I've got an experiment that we may be able to design to actually get at this. And if that's true, it should hopefully radically change our view of dreaming, that dreams are ephemeral, that they dissolve quickly, they're forgotten, and they don't influence us as a human species.
That would be pretty groundbreaking.
Yeah, we'll see.
You just had a study I just read, I think yesterday on sleep and it affecting behavior, loneliness.
So we just published a study demonstrating that sleep loss will trigger viral loneliness. And it was a 3-part study. I mean, firstly, the reason that I got into this was loneliness is a killer. We know that there is a massive epidemic of loneliness now in industrialized nations. Being lonely increases your mortality risk by about 45%. In other words, being lonely is twice as risky for your death concern than obesity.
Wow.
Which is striking.
Yeah, there was actually a study showing loneliness changes like a massive amount of gene expression and like upregulates NF-kappa B, cortisol, like all these pro-inflammatory genes. So it makes sense that they'd be associated with.
And what's bizarre about loneliness, by the way, I'm taking this has got nothing to do with sleep, but if you look at the profile of your gene expression and your immune system, you've got some immune components that will go after viruses, And viruses can only be transmitted from one human being to another by way of touch. They can't live outside of our bodies. Bacteria, so if you scrape yourself on a fence, like, walking past it, you can get a bacterial infection because bacteria can live outside of the body. When you become lonely, your gene expression shifts you away from a profile of immunity that normally deals with viruses and pushes you to more towards a bacterial defense profile.
Really?
Isn't that incredible? That
Yeah, you
your
have to send me that study. Yeah, that's fascinating.
And there's a couple of folks at UCLA who, if you ever have interest in this area of how loneliness, the mind, mood.
Oh, totally.
Okay,
Yeah.
I've got to give you these people. I'm a complete fan of
Please do.
their work, and they did this study, and it just blew my mind. How could a concept that is so sort of out there, and some people almost don't believe in loneliness, toughen up, what's wrong with you, go out and make some, how could that change the expression of your genes and even alter how you, the organism, fend for yourself from an immunological perspective, shifting you from viral to bacterial defense? But anyway, so coming back, I was desperately concerned about this state of loneliness. What was interesting, I was reading a lot at the time, because we do a lot of work with sleep and psychiatric disorders, including anxiety. And when I was reading the studies where they would take animals and they would deprive them of sleep, you've got this anxiogenic profile where you've got cortisol increasing, you've got a shift in insulin, glucose regulation, all of the bad things that you would not wish to happen, and anxiety increase. They had fear-like behavior, all by way of just sleep restriction. But what was also interesting is that sometimes the researchers would note, despite not measuring it systematically, that the animals would often be secluded by themselves in the cage, even when they were with other conspecifics. And other conspecifics would not approach them either.
Okay.
And so it seemed to me, just from reading this, I thought, well, this seems like an animal phenotype of human loneliness. And it seems to be caused by a lack of sleep. So we decided we had to do the study. And so the first part of the study, we took a group of individuals and they went through the study twice. They were either deprived of sleep for an entire night or they got a full 8 hours of sleep. The first test was, do you have a social repulsion boundary? And that boundary is increased when you are sleep deprived. So I think everyone has that sense that if I start moving closer to you, you think, okay, do you know what? At some point, that's kind of enough. That's about my close distance. What's interesting is that if I ask a sleep-deprived individual to stay put, and I ask you as an experimenter to walk towards the sleep-deprived individual, and the individual says, stop when they feel comfortable, relative to when that very same individual has had a full 8-hour night of sleep, when you're sleep-deprived, you decide to push people a further distance away from you. So you have a lowered desire for social proximity and social interaction. Second, we then replicated that finding, but now we had them inside the MRI scanner because we wanted to see what was changing in the brain to produce this social repulsion. What we found was that the regions of the brain that are essentially an alarm network, which is a sort of a stay away from me network that is sort of in the parietal cortex and the premotor cortex, it's sort of what we call the near space network. So it creates your comfort of boundary, and when objects start to approach you, it alarms to say, incoming, be cautious, be wary. That part of the brain became hyperactive when people were sleep deprived.
Wow.
As if you were getting this repulsion signal from the brain. If that wasn't bad enough, the other parts of the brain that have been called the theory of mind network, which sort of helps you understand the intent of other people. It's a pro-social network in the brain. It cooperates pro-social interaction. That part of the brain was shut down by sleep deprivation. So it's a double-edged sort of sword.
Yeah.
So we weren't satisfied with that. Next, we wanted to say, could someone who just looked at these sleep-deprived individuals, could they actually judge them as being lonelier and looking lonelier and being sort of perceived as lonely, even though they knew nothing about the experiment? So in the experiment with the sleep-deprived individuals, we also did videotaped interviews with them. And we just asked them general questions. Tell us about a movie that you watched or what was happening in the news this week, just bland stuff. And then we got 1,000, I think it was over 1,000 people, 1,083 people online. And they knew nothing about the experiment. They didn't know it was about sleep, sleep deprivation, knew nothing. And we showed them just a 60-second clip of these people when they'd had a good night of sleep and when they were sleep deprived. And we just asked them, how lonely does this person appear to you? And they knew nothing, but despite knowing nothing, they consistently and reliably rated the sleep-deprived version of the individual as seeming lonelier. We also asked them, would you socially interact with this person? Would you friend them on Facebook? Would you work with them in a business environment? And they consistently rated that they would prefer not to engage and interact with them.
Is that because they just looked unhappy or looked?
Well, we actually think it's a collection of things. It's that their appearance, but also their vocal tone is very different. And we think there's a lot of this is now one of the key things. What's communicating this asocial profile?
Oh, so they were listening to them speak.
So they watched them and they listened to them speak, so they could hear them as well. So we demonstrated that there was, unfortunately, this social repulsion on both sides of the equation. When you're sleep deprived, you yourself don't want to have anything to do with other people. And that perhaps wouldn't be so bad if people would only at least come to your rescue, because they would see you in need. The opposite is true. People find you socially repulsive as a consequence. So there's a push from both sides of the social dyad. The next thing we asked those people who were rating the sleep-deprived individuals, we also said, look, how lonely do you feel after just this 60-second clip? And they themselves felt lonelier after interacting with sleep-deprived individuals. In other words, there's contagion of sleep deprivation-induced loneliness.
So I wonder how much of this can be translated to like someone that, say, for example, gets only 5 or 6 hours of sleep versus, of course, not getting a full night's sleep. You know, maybe there's like just a little bit of this penetrating.
Well, we then asked that question. That was the final part of the study, which is that we said, okay, this is extreme sleep deprivation, and most of the population does not undergo this. What about a more ecological version? So we tracked hundreds of people across 2 nights of sleep. And we asked, is just by a subtle variation of nature, are small perturbations of sleep from one night to the next, do they predict how lonely you experience yourself to be from one day to the next? And these are small, minute changes in sleep efficiency, just small reductions in sleep of tens of minutes. Lo and behold, even just that small change in your sleep from one night to the next, we could measure, predicted how lonely you would experience life the next day from one day to the next. So it doesn't even take, 2 hours of sleep reduction.
Wow.
Small minutes.
I remember reading somewhere too that isn't the like amygdala like hyperactive or something happens. There's not like an inhibitory signal that occurs if you're sleep deprived.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So then you're feeling more, you're like alarmed and just anxious and feeling that threat.
That's right.
That ongoing threat that really isn't there.
Exactly. Yeah. So we published this study in 2007 where we again sort of sleep deprived people, put them inside an MRI scanner, and we showed them increasingly negative and aversive and unpleasant images. And what we saw is that relative to people who'd got a full night of sleep, the amygdala, this sort of emotional epicenter for the generation of strong emotional impulsive reactions, that deep emotional center was 60% more reactive under conditions of a lack of sleep. And then we asked why. Why is your emotional brain so sort of sensitive and erupting with such extraordinary activity? And what we then went on to find out in later work was that another part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex that sits directly above your eyes here, and particularly the middle part right between your eyes, that part of the brain acts almost like the CEO of the brain for your emotions and your hedonic impulses. And it sends sort of an inhibitory top-down regulatory control. It's sort of like the brakes on the gas pedal of your emotions. That part of the brain was shut down by sleep deprivation, and you'd lost that communication to the amygdala. So now you, from an emotional standpoint, you were all emotional gas pedal and too little regulatory control brake, as it were.
It's really interesting. This work kind of reminds me of, I'm not sure if you're aware of any of this research. A lot of it's been done by Dr. Molly Crockett, who I believe now she's at Harvard. But she has done a lot of studies looking at serotonin depletion in the brain.
Yeah.
And basically, you can induce that by giving acute tryptophan depletion, giving someone like branched-chain amino acids to compete with transport for tryptophan in the brain, which then basically drops serotonin levels. I mean, you can drop your serotonin levels down to like 10%.
And mood is...
And the same thing happens where exactly what you were describing, the inhibitory signal that happens from the prefrontal cortex onto the amygdala is like stops. And so people become extremely impulsive. They become in terrible moods, a little more aggressive. Their long-term planning shuts down, and they just like short-term, going for the short-term gratification. Very similar. So it'd be kind of interesting. I don't know how serotonin would be related to all that, but there must be some sort of connection.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's a number of different, neurochemicals that can produce that same kind of neural phenotype, as it were. But what struck me was that when I looked at that neural signature of sleep deprivation for the emotional brain, it was not dissimilar to numerous psychiatric conditions.
Right.
And that then now, 11 years ago, showing my age, but that set sort of, the Sleep Center off on a completely new trajectory of work, and we're doing a lot of this work in sleep and psychiatric disorders. And I think one of the most fundamental things that I can say at this point is that we have not been able to discover a single psychiatric condition in which sleep is normal. And so I think sleep has a profound story to tell in our understanding, maybe our treatment. I don't know about prevention, but possibly of grave mental illness. And psychiatry has known this, by the way, for 40 or 50 years. It's always been documented that sleep disturbance goes hand in hand with psychiatric disturbance.
Maybe there's some sort of complex gene-environment interaction. People that are more genetically susceptible and are getting losing the sleep are like the ones that are kind of pushed into a disease state.
And we've seen this too, that if you look at that emotional brain reaction signature that I just sort of described, and you repeat that, but with people who are high anxious and low anxious, and we know some of the genes that are associated with being high anxious and low anxious. So we're using anxiety as a sort of a proxy for perhaps a particular genotype here. What you see is that it's those high anxious people who are the most vulnerable to this impact of a lack of sleep. Those who are low anxious still have a bad outcome, but it's nowhere near as bad. So there seems to be sort of interactions here between sleep loss and your basic trait levels of being sort of a nervous, anxious type to begin with. And those are the people who are, sadly, the people who typically don't get a good night of sleep anyway.
Right. So I was going to say, anxiety is like one of the things that stops me from sleeping.
It's the principal trigger of insomnia. It's the model of insomnia right now. Is that you get, and if you look at the nervous system, that's how we understand insomnia right now, is that it's principally, I think ultimately we'll find that there are multiple flavors of insomnia, different forms. We already categorized two of them. We've got what we call sleep onset insomnia and sleep maintenance insomnia. Difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep. They're not mutually exclusive. You can have both, or you can just have one or the other. But coming back to it, I think the overarching biological red thread narrative of insomnia is an amplified fight or flight nervous system. That your nervous system is split into these two branches, what we call sort of the sympathetic and parasympathetic parts of your autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic is anything but sympathetic. It's poorly named. It's the fight or flight branch of your nervous system. It ramps you up, charges you up, releases cortisol, adrenaline. You constantly see an overactive sympathetic nervous system in people with insomnia. And when you measure their cortisol across the 24-hour period, in most of us, just as we're getting to our natural bedtime, cortisol just starts to now drop down. We start to see that cycling down of cortisol. The opposite happens in people with insomnia. You get a continued rise right around that bedroom period, and it seems to be very predictive of sleep onset problems. If you look throughout the night, cortisol then starts to plummet and it drops beautifully down. It's part of the reason why deep sleep is the best form of natural blood pressure medication that you could ever wish for. Your heart rate drops down, your vessels relax, cortisol drops down. But in other insomnia patients, we see this bizarre spike in cortisol in the middle of the night, and it predicts nighttime awakenings. It predicts sleep maintenance insomnia.
I've experienced, that's one of the problems that I actually have. It's much, much better now that my stress level is like maintained.
Yeah.
But in graduate school, I would get nighttime awakenings where my heart would start racing and I would wake up thinking that there was a spider or some kind of threat, and I would scream and sometimes fly out of the bed. I mean, and just, it would scare my husband, at the time we weren't married, but I mean, these nighttime awakenings, it was something that's dated back for quite some time, but really it manifested during a very stressful period, and that was graduate school.
We see that
got much better
so frequently.
Yeah.
But if you can think about that as sort of, a stress management component to insomnia, it's part of what we call cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is sort of dealing with that stress. Meditation, there's great apps out there like Headspace, for example. And the data on meditation and insomnia is very, very powerful. I'd known about it a little bit, but I hadn't read really all of the studies until I started researching it for the book. And I was so convinced that I started meditating, and I haven't stopped since, because it was, typically I'm not a bad sleeper. I'm a light sleeper, but I'm a pretty good sleeper. I found it hugely useful for times when I was under stress or when I was traveling and jet lag. It's very beneficial too. But that underlying theme, I think, is a message for insomnia. It's not the only cause of insomnia, but it seems to be, if there's one common sort of rule that binds many of the patients with insomnia together, it's this overactive fight or flight branch of the nervous system. And if you can settle that down, you are certainly on the path towards better sleep.
Right. And to kind of just another point that you made was talking about, the hormonal response and the cortisol rising typically when it's supposed to be falling, and that kind of prevents you from falling asleep. There is some interesting research that I've read where, and I know you and I have talked about the importance of bright light exposure.
Yeah.
And bright light exposure for 6 hours a day, I mean, no one does that nowadays. We're always inside. So it's rare unless you're like working out in a nature park or something.
The irony of these things is not, it's for the camera, I promise.
Right, but it actually, it was shown to lower cortisol by 25%. So this is like, another kind of, I don't know if that would even help someone with the anxiety or,
I think it's, there's no studies testing it yet, but there are studies. So just to go back to make this point, we normally have a circadian rhythm, this beautiful sort of 24-hour rhythm, and we human beings, we're diurnal and we like to sleep at night, be awake during the day. We have this awesome upswing of our circadian rhythm, sort of once we wake up, sort of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It starts to peak during the day. It drops down a little bit in the mid-afternoon, and that's why you sort of get around meeting tables in the middle of the afternoon, these sort of, head nods. It's not people listening to good music. It's like actually, there's a pre-programmed dip in your alertness, and then it rises back up, and then it drops down at night. And one of the ways that you can get this sort of what you would want, which is a nice sinusoidal wave, you want a nice strong peak of the circadian rhythm during the day so that you're awake and you're active during the day and you're productive. And then you want an awesome sort of trough throughout the night, right, so that you sleep soundly, deeply, and in a stable fashion. And the way that you can sort of help your circadian rhythm have that wonderful peak and delightful trough is by getting lots of daylight during the day, but lots of darkness during the night. And we are a dark-deprived society in this modern era, and it is a huge problem in the evening. But I think people have underestimated that we are a light-deprived society during the day. So what happens is that your brain goes through life in this kind of almost stupor state where it's not getting enough daylight to really keep it ramped up throughout the day. So you're sleepy throughout the day and you're tired, but then we've got too much light in the evening, so you end up being awake at night. So then you're sleepy during the day, you're awake at night. And so it's almost like I would call it a seesaw. I think we call it a teeter-totter here. During the day, you want daylight to come in and force you all the way onto the on switch, and you're active and awake. And then at night, you want the signal of darkness to come in to trigger the release of a hormone called melatonin to shift you all the way into the off position, so you go into deep sleep and a sound sleep. But now with artificial light and staying out of bright light, sort of the teeter-totter is just pushed a little bit to one side, and then sort of with not enough darkness at night, it's only pushed a little bit down on the other side. So you kind of have this flip-flop switch that it's like a dimmer switch that is basically just on dim for 24 hours rather than light and complete darkness, if that makes sense.
Yes.
It's a terrible analogy. But
do you have any idea like how much bright light exposure, like, you know, let's say, you know, a lot of people work in like a little cubicle where they don't even have windows. I mean, they're just like in the middle of this like little room with no actual sunlight coming in. You know, is something like if you wake up in the morning and you go outside for 30 minutes or an hour first thing in the morning, like most people are drinking their coffee. Well, maybe what you need is bright light exposure instead of your coffee, or drink your coffee outside, whatever.
Right. Yeah. Take the coffee on
Do you know how much light you need? And if you don't have light outside, let's say you live in London and you're in the winter and there's it's just gray.
Well, even on a cloudy day, the lux intensity of light far exceeds that you would have from incandescent light or at sort of typical lights inside of a building.
Okay, so that would be my second question, the lux amount. So do you know?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, if you look at the studies, once you get over a sort of, you know, about sort of 5,000 to 10,000 lux, you can have a pretty powerful effect. I don't believe there's, and I could be wrong, but and Sachin Pandra, our good friend, who is just A+. In fact, if you're watching this, like, stop watching this now. Just go and watch the Sachin Panda podcast. He's much more powerful and eloquent than I am. But they have looked at the degree of exposure to outside light, not necessarily the intensity of light during that outside exposure time. So I don't think we yet understand exactly what the dose response is in terms of lux intensity. What we do know is that getting 30 to 40 minutes of outside morning light is critical. But here's the trick. Here in California, a lot of people make this mistake, but even in London, it happens despite cloudy day. People put shades on in the morning. Don't do that. I know it looks good, but don't. You let that natural light penetrate your eye. There's a retinal mechanism that goes through to your thalamus, that then goes through to the hypothalamus that regulates your circadian clock, and you need that light penetration. You're losing all of that good stuff, or some of it, if you put shades on. Wear sun protection, that's fine. Just nix the shades in the morning. In the afternoon, reverse the trick. And this is actually a very good tip for jet lag. Jet lag is essentially an extreme form of what most of us have, which is this, what we've been describing, this diluted amount of light during the day and then too much light at night. Jet lag, you really should get out in the morning, 40 minutes of daylight, no shades. And in the afternoon, it's fine to go out, but when you go out, now's the time to put shades on, because you can start to encourage even then the release of melatonin, which is that hormone of darkness, which signals the timing of healthy sleep.
So about what time in the afternoon would you say shades are?
So I would say, probably it depends on your bedtime, if you're a morning owl or an evening lark, and we can speak about chronotype. So it really depends on when you're planning on going to bed. But let's say that you're planning on going to bed at about 10 p.m. I would say if you're sort of going out after about sort of 4:30-ish, now is a good time to maybe start to help dilute down some of that light. But then, in the evenings, we are so bathed and saturated in light. And yes, we can speak a lot about LED screens, and they are impactful, and there's been lots of work on that, some of which haven't replicated, but many of which have. I think the bigger problem is just overhead lighting in general. We're just infused in every room that we go. And my recommendation has now been, in the last hour before bed, just turn off half of the lights in your house. We don't necessarily need all of them blazing in the last hour before bed. And when you do that, it's quite surprising how soporific and somnogenic it actually is. And I want to do the experiment, although someone beat me to the experiment and they did it. It's one of those studies when I read it, I just thought, my first reaction, and I'm not a big person, my first reaction was, oh, I'm so jealous.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh, I wish I'd done that. And then I just thought, this is a brilliant paper, I can't wait to teach it. They took a group of people, they looked at their habitual amount of sleep that they would typically get. And these people were getting sort of 7.5 to 8 hours. And they would ask, when are you going to sleep? And sort of most of them would go to bed like 11 and then sleep through till 7. And then they took them out of that typical, modernity environment, and they took them out to the Rockies. And they had sleep tracking equipment on them, and they took them there for several weeks. And there was no electricity whatsoever, not even a torch, not even a headlamp from a car, nothing. And then they looked to see what changed. The first thing was that these people went from sleeping, an acclaimed 7.5 or 7 hours of sleep, that was their norm. It was actually just below 7, saying that was fine, that's all I needed. To then actually, when they had no watches, they didn't know when to wake up, no alarm clocks. They ended up sleeping closer to 9 hours a night, which is what we typically see when you saturate sort of people away from, or dislocate them from modernity.
So would you say that's a good sleep duration?
So I think somewhere between 7 to 9 is what we recommend. But I think when you do this in healthy young people, and these were healthy young people, they seem to acclimate to a sleep amount that was somewhere between sort of 8 to 9 hours of sleep. So I think it's good evidence that, you can look at how hunter-gatherer tribes were sleeping, and we've studied, these people, and they actually sleep in a strange manner, and we can get back to that. And people have tried to use them as the gold standard as to how we should be sleeping.
They're a lot more active, and things are so
I don't
different,
think it's
right?
a good control. I think we should say, let's take modern human beings and let's just take them out of all context of modernity, and let's see how they're sleeping. Let's just sort of put them on an ad lib buffet of sleep, and they can just sleep as much as they want. They're not told when to wake up and sort of when to go to bed. And they seem to sleep what we now think of as a natural amount, which is somewhere between, if you look at the distribution, 7 to 9 hours.
These are younger individuals, sure.
Yeah, so, and we can speak about, and I hope we speak about sleep and aging. But what was also interesting is when they slept, not just how much they slept. They started to go to bed earlier and earlier and earlier, and they started to wake up a little bit earlier and earlier. And their total duration of sleep expanded, but where that expanded amount of sleep was positioned on the 24-hour clock was dragged back because they weren't influenced by these cues of, too much daylight at night. Temperature is another one that I'd love to speak about too. But what's fascinating is that when you look at hunter-gatherer tribes or these experiments of sort of true nature, the natural middle point of sleep, the middle phase, sort of time of the 8 to 9 hour sleep phase, came somewhere between midnight and 1 p.m. And I often ask people this question, have you ever thought about what the term midnight actually means? It means the middle of the solar night, which is the time when most of us should be in the middle of our sleep phase. But now, in the 21st century, we've gone through the agrarian sort of, push into the industrial era and now into the digital era. Now midnight is the time when we maybe check Facebook for the last time or think about sending that last email. So not only has the duration of our sleep decreased through the influence of the modern times, but also when we're sleeping has been dramatically shifted too.
Right. I know I've made some changes a few years ago to my place where I was telling you I have Philips Hue lights that turn on red light, and they come on actually quite early. They come on around 5 p.m. In fact, when we have visitors, they start to go crazy when sunset and it's like red and they're like getting sleepy and they're like, it's like, why is it so dark in here? Can we turn the lights on? And it's like, no, because that's what you're supposed to be getting sleepy right now. You're supposed to be getting, it's 6 o'clock, 6:30. Well, depending on what time of year it is, the sun setting, you should be getting sleepy.
It's one of the key triggers.
It really works.
Temperature is the other key trigger that I think that's probably, in the past 3 years, that's what we've really understood is that temperature is as powerful a trigger of sleep organization and sleep depth as light is.
And sleep depth.
And sleep depth as well. So what typically happens is that for you to fall asleep and stay asleep, your body needs to drop its core temperature by about 1 degree Celsius or about sort of 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's the reason that you will always find it easier to fall asleep in a room that's too cold than too hot. Because the room that's too cold is at least taking you in the right thermal direction for good sleep. It's dragging your body down into a cooler realm. And when you look at these hunter-gatherer tribes, the San in Namibia, you can look at them, whose way of life hasn't changed for thousands of years. They don't go to bed necessarily as immediately as the sun goes down. They usually go to bed maybe sort of 8 or 9 in the evening, several hours after sundown. But when they do really start to go to bed is when the temperature drops. As the sun drops, the ambient temperature remains for a little while, and then it starts to drop too as the land cools and the ambient temperature cools with the land because darkness has ensued. That seems to be a thermal trigger for them getting sleepy and falling asleep. Then when you look at when they wake up, they typically wake up 15 to 20 minutes before dawn. So it's not light that seems to be necessarily the trigger instigating the awakening. It's actually the rise of temperature.
And that's on a circadian rhythm, right?
And that's on a circadian rhythm. So what is entraining us to our natural sleep rhythms is both temperature and light. So this comes back to our modern homes where we go into offices and we don't necessarily have the rising warmth of the day to activate us because we're set at 70 degrees. And then we go home and our thermostats are set at 70 degrees again, or whatever your standard temperature is. And we don't get the thermal cue through our bodies to say it's time for sleep. So no wonder our sleep is worse. And if you manipulate people's core temperature, and you can do this through showers, hot baths, you can do it through saunas, but there was a great experiment where they essentially designed what it looked like a kind of a wetsuit. And throughout the wetsuit were all of these plastic veins running through them. And the researchers were able to exquisitely control through water at different temperatures the temperature of any part of your body. So would I want to warm your hands and your feet? Or would I want to warm your core? And so what they were able to do is, these people, I mean, talk about being stripped of your dignity. You know, you get into this like wetsuit, you zip it up and you say, right, I'm off to bed. In you go. And then they would manipulate core body temperature exquisitely. And lo and behold, when they dropped the core body temperature, they were able to induce sleep quicker. And the amount of deep sleep, what we call slow wave sleep, which is deep non-REM sleep, or stages 3 and 4, also called slow wave sleep because of these big, powerful, slow brain waves. That deep, rich non-REM sleep was increased somewhere between about 10 to 20%, which is non-trivial.
Wow.
Then they said, well, this is in sort of, you know, young, healthy people. What about people with insomnia and people who are older? Because older people struggle with sleep, and of course, insomnia. And they were able to get even greater mileage out of the thermal manipulation with those cohorts too. So I think it's a very interesting intervention possibility to try and augment and manipulate human sleep.
So do you think those things like the chili pads that are out there, you think those can potentially help deep sleep?
Yeah, I think, I don't know of any data from them yet. All I know is the experimental data that we've looked at, you know, with manipulation of body temperature. They did this in rats a while back, by the way, which is that they would warm their paws. And when they warmed their paws, the rats fell asleep quicker and stayed asleep. And you think, hang on a second, you just told me that you need to cool the body, but you're talking about warming them up.
Right.
And this is the reason why probably saunas work, hot baths work, and showers work, for the opposite reason that most people believe them to work. You think, you know, I get out of a hot bath and I'm nice and toasty, I get into bed and I fall asleep faster.
Oh, the shit.
It's not true. What happens is that you get into the bath, you get massive vasodilation. All of the vessels open up on the surface of your skin. That draws, it almost charms the blood out from the core of your body to the surface. And your skin and your hands and your feet especially act like these wonderful thermal radiators, and they dissipate the heat. So you get out of the bath and your core body temperature actually plummets. And that's what you need for good sleep. And I suspect it's the reason that saunas. I mean, I think you've had experience here too.
Definitely. It definitely affects my sleep. And going from a sauna into an ice cold shower and then doing kind of like going back and forth really helps sleep. And I've used that also going to other countries and getting in the sauna and going in the cold shower and then back in the sauna.
Triggering
and
it back.
Helps with my jet lag.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an N of 2 because my husband experienced the same thing. But, you know, there's definitely something there. And what you're saying absolutely happens. The sauna increases vasodilation, blood flow goes to the skin, and so just dissipation of heat. That all makes perfect sense. So hot baths.
Very quickly, just grab a quick mouthful of water.
The hot baths and hot showers are good before bed.
Yeah. And I'll just mention, I think that one thing that's, I think, fascinated me, though, about the benefit of exercise. So exercise also has a a really nice, powerful benefit on sleep, although it's a two-way street, and remind me to talk about that in a good way. But something else has occurred to me with saunas too, and I was thinking about this because I think, I know that you're a fan, I think you've mentioned this before. One of the ways that you can induce sleep is that you can increase a lot of the immune factors, things like cytokines, things also like TNF alpha, you can, or BDNF.
IL-6?
IL-6,
Yeah.
IL-1 even more so, but IL-6 is part of that equation too. And we've known this for some time, that if you infect an animal, it will create an immune antibody response, a cytokine cascade. Those cytokines have a direct communication pathway into brain structures, including things like the hypothalamus, which regulates sleep. And it's that immune cascade that is actually a trigger for dialing up the amount of sleep. So when animals get sick, just like when humans get sick, the thing that you want to do is just curl up in bed and go to sleep. And in fact, you get sleepier as a consequence of being infected. Why is that? The reason is because there is nothing better. Sleep is the Swiss Army knife of health, that no matter what the ailment,
That's so cool. I didn't know
there
that.
is something more than likely in the armament of sleep's toolbox, sort of as it were, that will deal with that. And so, and I promise I'm not going off on a tangent here. So the idea is that these immune factors are sleep instigating. They are
This is awesome.
sleep sort of, they're somnogenic, somnus, sleep, genic, increased genesis improvement. So what I've been thinking about is whether or not the sauna, the benefit of the sauna, is both thermal,
Yes.
but is also by way of this powerful immune pathway.
It does.
That you get this.
That's
and I've read some of the studies, and I'm blanking on his name. You will probably remember his name. They've looked at sort of some of the essentially sort of the sauna-induced immune responses.
Yeah, so that Charles Raison's been doing that work.
Yeah,
yes.
thank you, brilliant. Yeah, so I've read some of Charles's papers.
Yeah, we had him on the podcast. He was talking about how the sauna induces IL-6.
Yep.
And some of that stuff, and the same thing that happens with exercise.
Yes, so that's why I mentioned exercise,
right.
Which is that I think...
Wow, that's so fascinating.
So now we're all starting to sort of, realize how the sleep system is augmented. One of those paths, is light, the other is darkness, the other is temperature, but here's a fourth one, the immune system. Mm-hmm. And we know that you can inject, some of these cytokines into animals, and you can almost induce sleep. It's that powerful.
That's so
So
cool.
now I'm starting to think, I wonder if some of the sauna-based benefits and some of the exercise benefits, because when you exercise, you also typically get some of these pro-inflammatory cytokines that sort of get released to perhaps deal with some of, the essential, the stress. And, I think we've both spoken about this, that you
So is that why, if you're exercising a lot, you do seem to require more sleep, or you sleep more?
Well, we don't know
Maybe
that, but that's my
that's a
theory,
great
which
hypothesis,
is that, you
So are you going to test that? That's awesome.
Yeah, we're going to test it. So we've just actually been looking at a study, not with exercise or with saunas, but we've actually been looking at sleep and pain. And when you deprive people of sleep, you get a chronic release of these pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is not a good situation. Acute, great, somnogenic, good for the body, but chronic long-term, and we're starting to piece together a brain-body sleep-pain interaction, which I think we haven't published this yet, but should have marked implications for the hospital environment, because the one place where you do not get a good night of sleep, where it's architected against the night of sleep, is the one place where you need sleep the most, and it's usually the one place where you are in pain the most. And I want a revolution to happen regarding sleep in hospitals, and I'm desperately trying to work with folks, for example, in the NHS in the United Kingdom, National Healthcare System there. I would love to work with any hospital system in the US to solve this crisis, I think, of sleep in the hospital environment. But to come back to your point, this is a great experiment to do. Is exercise-induced acute inflammation, and is sort of, heat shock sensitive, induction of immune responses by way of saunas or hot baths, are those a pathway triggering good sleep? And if so, can we find novel therapeutics for,
I'll put you in touch with Dr. Jari Laukkanen too. He's in Finland. He's like the leading researcher on saunas. And
has he done some of the stuff on longevity?
He's the guy doing all the longevity, Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease. And he's a friend of mine as well. So I'll put you in touch with him because that would be really cool if you guys could.
If we can start tracking their sleep,
right?
And see that perhaps, and you can sort of put this into a statistical sort of triangulation, which is called a mediation analysis, and you could see, what's causing that longevity benefit, because we know, for example, that the shorter your sleep, the shorter your life. That short sleep predicts all-cause mortality. It's also probably one of the most significant lifestyle factors determining whether or not you'll develop Alzheimer's disease. And all of these things I know have been linked to, for example, sauna use, which is longevity, decreased susceptibility to development of dementia and cognitive decline, is part of that. I'm not trying to say it's all about sleep. But part of it
really,
sleep,
one of my major interests is aging, increasing health span, as well as performance, without the trade-off. Yeah. And every time, I always come back to sleep. The studies, it's just constantly coming back in my face how important sleep is for all of those things.
And it's the superordinate lever that transacts all health benefits. It's the tide that rises all of the health boats. And I think it's wonderful that folks, here in Silicon Valley are going after, individual pathways of disease, trying to manipulate, immune pathways or trying to manipulate mTOR for sort of, longevity. But I think what's been missing in this equation is that there is, an Archimedes lever here. There is one superordinate node that if you pull that lever, all of the other pathways are instigated and activated, and that superordinate node or lever is this thing called sleep. There is no physiological system that we've been able to measure that isn't wonderfully enhanced by sleep when you get it, or demonstrably impaired when you don't get enough.
Right. I kind of wanted to go back because you were talking about the effects on the how the immune system can be, what did you call it? Sleep, when it induces sleep?
Oh, it's somnogenic.
Somnogenic, yes. How it's somnogenic. So interesting. I had no idea that the cytokines were responsible for that, and it makes perfect sense. So anyways, but also the opposite is true, where sleep also affects the immune system, or lack of sleep also,
it does, yeah.
And that is something, that's your immune system's the first line of defense against pretty much everything, right? Cancer, viruses, bacteria.
Yep.
And I think in your book, you were talking about the effects on some studies on natural killer T cells.
Yeah.
I was just blown away by some of the numbers.
This is a frightening study. So it was done by my colleague Mike Owen, and you take a group of individuals and you're not going to deprive them of sleep for an entire night. You're simply going to limit them, restrict them to 4 hours of sleep for one single night. And then we're going to measure the amount of reduction in natural killer cell activity. So just to take a step back, natural killer cells are a critical part of your immune defense arsenal. And today, both you and I and everyone listening to this podcast, we all have cancer cells that have emerged in our bodies. But typically what prevents those cells from becoming this disease that we call cancer is in part these natural killer cells. So what you wish for is a virile set of these sort of immune assassins, these sort of James Bond-like, that they will annihilate these foreign organisms. You want a virile set of those at all times. So take a group of healthy people, limit them to 4 hours of sleep for one night, and what you see is a 70% reduction in natural killer cell activity, 7-0. That is an alarming state of immune deficiency, and it happens quickly, essentially, after one bad night of sleep. So you can imagine, the state of your immune system after weeks, if not years, of insufficient sleep. And it's now the reason I think that we probably are finding at the epidemiological level significant links between short sleep duration, not getting enough sleep, defined as 6 hours or less, and your risk for the development of numerous forms of cancer. Currently, that list includes cancer of the bowel, cancer of the...
Peter, we're nødt til at stoppe. Det er immensely interesting sleep enhancing learning, creativity, immunity. Hvad skal vaske tøj? Yes. OMG. OMG. Ja, jeg skal vaske tøj. Jeg har glemt at vaske tøj. Easy input. Og der er frit nu. Til senere. Hey, og skriv lige på science fiction, hvornår vi skal ses. Og hvor. Jeg er ligeglad. Helst Mikkel, han har en stor sofa og et stort tv. Og et kæmpe tv. Det skal du hos Mikkel.